The day I realized my driveway wasn't mine anymore was the day everything changed. It started with gravel. Fresh gravel. Perfectly spread. Right across the back access path that had connected my property to the main road for nearly 12 years. At first, I thought it was maintenance, until I saw the sign. Private drive, resident access only. And beneath it, a polished black mailbox with gold lettering. The Whitmore Estate. That's when I understood. This wasn't maintenance. It was a takeover. The back access road, a 20-foot wide strip running along the edge of her property, had always been a recorded easement. It legally allowed me and 2 other homeowners access to the secondary road behind our lots. Without it, my land became boxed in. Technically usable, practically trapped. And the person who decided it no longer existed? The HOA president. She lived in the largest house in the neighborhood, a sprawling stone-and-glass mansion locals casually referred to as the resort. 3 fountains. Private gate. 4-car garage. Estimated value? Just under $10 million. And she hated the idea that anyone drove behind her estate. So she decided to erase it. I walked up to her gate that afternoon and pressed the intercom. Static. Then her voice. Yes. You blocked a legal easement. Pause. No, I improved my property boundary. That's not your boundary. It is now. That was the first red flag. Not denial. Confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from someone who thinks position equals ownership. I have the easement documents, I said evenly. You should check with the HOA, she replied. The board reviewed it. The board. She was the board. Or at least she ran it like she was. That evening, I pulled my closing documents from the safe. There it was. Stamped. Recorded. A perpetual access easement filed with the county. Dated 1987. Long before her mansion existed. Long before she moved in. Long before she decided aesthetics mattered more than access. The next morning, I drove to the county records office and pulled the original plat map. The easement was clear as day. 20 feet wide. Running directly across the edge of what was now her landscaped rear lawn. Which meant one thing. She didn't improve her boundary. She built over my legal access. When I returned home, things escalated. There was now a decorative wrought iron barrier at the start of the easement, and a security camera pointed directly at the entry point. That wasn't landscaping. That was intimidation. By afternoon, I received an email blast from the HOA. Due to safety and traffic concerns, the rear gravel path has been permanently restricted. Restricted. Not removed. Restricted. That wording told me everything. She knew it wasn't hers to eliminate. But she was betting I wouldn't push. Most people don't. HOA presidents rely on fatigue, paperwork exhaustion, social pressure. But she made one critical mistake. She assumed I needed that road more than she needed access to hers. She was wrong. Because here's the part she didn't know yet. Her $10 million mansion had only one legal access route recorded on paper. And that route ran across the narrow shared ingress strip. A strip that partially touched my corner boundary. A strip governed by the same type of easement law she just tried to ignore. And, unlike her situation, mine was documented, enforced, and very, very specific.
She thought she landlocked me.
What she didn't realize is that property law works both ways. I didn't confront her again. Not yet. When someone makes a move that bold, you don't respond emotionally. You respond strategically. That night, I pulled every document tied to my property. Closing packet, title insurance policy, easement filings, county plat maps, HOA governing documents. Then, I found what I was looking for. The shared ingress strip. It was only 12 feet wide. A narrow paved lane that curved past the corner of my property before opening toward the main gated entrance of her estate. On paper, it was listed as a non-exclusive access easement benefiting 3 parcels.
Mine.
Hers. And 1 undeveloped lot. But here's what mattered. The easement language required mutual, unobstructed access and non-interference by benefiting parties. In simple terms, no one could interfere with another's legal access.
Which is exactly what she had just done to me.
The difference was scale. She blocked a secondary road. If I enforce my rights, I could block the only road feeding her $10 million mansion. The next morning, I hired a property attorney. Not a friend of a friend. Not a quick consultation. A specialist. He reviewed everything in under an hour. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. She doesn't own that rear strip, he said. I know. And if she's obstructed a recorded easement, she's exposed. How exposed? Court-ordered removal. Damages. Possibly attorney fees. And the ingress strip? He scanned that page carefully. Mutual obligation clause, he muttered. Interesting. How interesting? If she interferes with your access and refuses correction, you could petition enforcement. Meaning? Meaning if she wants to play hardball, you have leverage. That was all I needed. Not revenge. Leverage. I sent a formal demand letter that afternoon. Certified. Signature required. It was calm. Professional. Precise. Remove all obstructions from the rear easement within 14 days. Cease interference. Confirm compliance in writing. Or legal action would follow. No threats. Just facts. 3 days later, I got a response. Not compliance. A counter email from the HOA. The rear path was deemed unnecessary and unsafe. The board reserves the right to regulate community infrastructure. That told me everything. She wasn't going to back down voluntarily, which meant escalation. But here's where she miscalculated again. Her mansion wasn't just expensive. It was financed. Publicly recorded mortgage. And lenders care deeply about one thing. Legal access. A property without guaranteed access becomes legally compromised, uninsurable, unsellable, and sometimes, in extreme disputes, temporarily unusable. I didn't block anything. Not yet. Instead, my attorney filed something far more effective. A petition to enforce easement rights. And within it, a formal notice that continued interference could result in reciprocal enforcement under shared access provisions. Legal language for, if you cut mine off, I can legally cut yours off. That's when the shift happened. Not publicly. Quietly. Because a week later, contractors arrived at her rear lawn. Measuring. Taking photos. Inspecting the gravel she had laid over the easement. She must have realized the risk. Because 2 days after that, I received a call. Not from the HOA. From her personal attorney. The tone was different now. Measured. Careful. Mister, our client would like to resolve this amicably. Amicable would have been before she blocked access. A pause. She believed the path was abandoned. It's recorded. Yes. And enforceable. Another pause. We'd like to avoid litigation. There it was. The first crack in her armor. Because if this went to court, discovery would reveal everything. Who authorized the obstruction? Whether HOA funds were used improperly. Whether she knowingly interfered with a recorded easement. And worst of all, it would become public record. For someone who valued image as much as she did, that was unacceptable. But here's what she still didn't understand. This wasn't about restoring a gravel path anymore. It was about principle. She tried to landlock me, and in doing so, she put her own access at risk. The difference? I wasn't bluffing, and the clock was ticking. The contractors working behind her mansion weren't there to remove the gravel. They were there to evaluate exposure. I could tell by the way they measured the width of the easement, photographed the wrought iron barrier, documented the security camera placement. That wasn't landscaping. That was evidence control. 3 days later, the rear gravel began disappearing. Quietly. No HOA email. No announcement. No admission of error. Just workers restoring the path to its original state. But she made one crucial mistake. She removed the visible barrier, yet left the landscaping changes that subtly narrowed the usable width of the easement from 20 feet to roughly 14. Technically accessible. Legally non-compliant. It was a half measure. And half measures don't survive court review. My attorney sent a follow-up notice the same afternoon. Full restoration required. Original width. Original grade. No obstruction, visual or physical. That's when she escalated emotionally. I received a direct message from her that night. "You're enjoying this." I didn't respond, because this wasn't enjoyment. It was correction. The next morning, something interesting happened. A survey crew arrived at the narrow ingress strip, the only road leading to her mansion. Not hired by me, by her lender. I recognized the company logo immediately. Banks don't send surveyors unless someone's nervous. Which meant one thing. Her attorney had disclosed the easement dispute, and the bank wanted confirmation that access to a $10 million asset wasn't under threat. Now the pressure wasn't neighborhood gossip. It was financial. By Friday afternoon, I got another call from her attorney. "We'd like to propose a formal settlement." Go on. Full restoration of the rear easement. Written acknowledgement of access rights. HOA policy amendment clarifying boundary enforcement. And, in exchange for mutual assurance that you will not pursue enforcement against the shared ingress strip. There it was. She finally understood leverage. Not revenge.
Risk.
Because if I had filed reciprocal enforcement, the ingress strip could have been temporarily restricted pending court clarification. Even a short restriction would have been catastrophic. Deliveries halted. Service vehicles denied. Potential insurance flags raised. And worst of all, public filings questioning legal access to her estate. For someone obsessed with prestige, that would have been devastating. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Add one more term." A pause. What term? A recorded affirmation of perpetual easement compliance filed with the county. Signed by her personally. That wasn't petty. It was protective. If she ever tried this again, or if a future board attempted something similar, the document would stand on record.
Permanent.
Enforceable. Her attorney hesitated. That's significant. So was blocking my land. The settlement draft arrived Monday morning. Every term included. Full restoration. With verified by third-party survey. No HOA interference authority over recorded easements. Personal signature acknowledgement. And quietly embedded within the document, a clause stating neither party admitted wrongdoing. Of course. Image preserved. But here's the part she didn't anticipate. Word spreads. Not because I posted about it. Because contractors talk. Surveyors talk. Attorneys talk. Within weeks, the neighborhood understood something subtle but powerful. She had overstepped. And she had backed down. At the next HOA meeting, attendance doubled. Questions were sharper. Budgets were scrutinized. Authority was no longer assumed. And for the first time since she became president, she didn't dominate the room. She defended. Power doesn't disappear in one explosion. It erodes in moments like that. But the real turning point came a month later. At the annual property disclosures update, the HOA's legal counsel formally presented the new easement compliance amendment. And while it was framed as clarification policy, everyone knew what it was. A safeguard against her. When the vote came, it passed unanimously. Even her supporters voted yes. Because no one wanted their access questioned. Not after seeing how close she came to losing hers. The irony? She tried to landlock me to protect her privacy. Instead, she exposed her vulnerability. And she learned something expensive. When you play property games with someone who understands property law, you might end up negotiating for your own driveway. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. The rear easement was fully restored, 20 feet wide, freshly graded, clearly marked. A third-party surveyor filed the verification with the county, just like the settlement required. On paper, resolved. In reality, shifted. Because power dynamics in a neighborhood don't reset overnight. They redistribute. At the next HOA board meeting, she showed up composed, polished as ever, but noticeably restrained. No long speeches. No vision statements. No subtle jabs about community safety. Instead, the treasurer led most of the discussion. Budgets were broken down line by line. Votes were taken formally. For the first time in years, meetings felt procedural instead of performative. And then came the agenda item no one expected. Proposal. Independent Oversight Committee. a small rotating group of homeowners to review any structural changes, land use adjustments, or access modifications before board approval. It wasn't labeled as distrust. It was labeled as transparency. But everyone understood why it existed. She didn't oppose it. She couldn't. Not after nearly jeopardizing access to her own mansion. The vote passed easily. And something subtle happened in that room. Her influence thinned.
Not gone. Just diluted.
Outside the meetings, I noticed smaller signs of retreat. The security camera that once pointed directly at the easement entry? Repositioned. The decorative landscaping that had crept toward the boundary? Trimmed back. Even the tone of HOA emails changed. Less authoritative. More collaborative. But the real shift came from somewhere unexpected. Her lender required an updated access certification as part of their annual review. Standard procedure after a recorded dispute. That meant surveyors came back.
Twice.
And every time a white truck with a measuring tripod parked near her estate entrance, neighbors noticed. Prestige doesn't like paperwork. And nothing undermines perceived control like repeated verification of your own driveway. A few months later, board elections approached. Historically, she ran uncontested. This time, 3 candidates filed, all citing governance clarity and property rights awareness in their platforms.
Subtle.
But pointed. At the candidate forum, one homeowner asked a simple question. Should any board member ever interfere with a recorded easement? She answered carefully.
No. Short.
Measured.
Different.
Election night came quietly. No drama. No speeches. Just ballots. When results were posted the next morning, she had lost by a clear margin. Not a landslide, but decisive. She didn't contest it. Didn't send an email. Didn't protest. She simply stepped down. And that was it. No mansion sold. No lawsuit filed. No dramatic public fallout. Just a gradual transfer of authority back to process. Weeks later, I passed her at the community mailbox cluster. She nodded.
Not warmly.
Not coldly. Just neutrally. And in that brief moment, I realized something important. She never expected resistance. Not legal resistance. Not structured pushback. She expected fatigue. Most people, when blocked by an HOA president, weigh the cost of fighting.
Time.
Money. Stress. And they fold. She assumed I would. Instead, I documented. Filed. Verified. Enforced. Not loudly. Precisely. She tried to erase an easement. What she erased instead was the illusion that her position placed her above property law. And in the end, I didn't have to landlock her mansion. I just had to remind her that access, like authority, only exists when it's respected. A year later, you wouldn't know anything had happened. The rear easement is just a gravel path again. Service trucks use it. Neighbors pass through occasionally. No drama. No tension.
On the surface, it's ordinary.
But the neighborhood isn't the same. The HOA now sends quarterly financial breakdowns. All structural proposals require recorded boundary verification. Any easement-related change triggers automatic legal review. Overkill? Maybe. Necessary? Absolutely. Because here's what people finally understood. Property law isn't about convenience. It's about permanence. You can dislike an easement. You can find it inconvenient. You can even think it's outdated. But if it's recorded, it's real. And trying to erase it casually can trigger consequences far bigger than gravel and gates. As for her mansion, still there. Still impressive. Still worth around $10 million. But there's one small difference now. The ingress strip, the narrow shared access lane feeding her estate, has fresh boundary markers embedded at the corners. Permanent brass survey caps. Visible. Intentional. They weren't required. They were installed after the dispute. A quiet reminder that access is documented. Not assumed. We don't speak much anymore. There's no hostility. Just distance. And, honestly, that's fine. Because this was never about revenge. Despite what the title might suggest. I never physically blocked her driveway. Never poured concrete. Never chained gates. Never staged some dramatic showdown.
I didn't need to.
The possibility was enough. The legal exposure was enough. The lender's survey trucks were enough. The board election was enough. What she thought was a power move turned into a vulnerability test. And she failed it, not because she lacked resources, but because she underestimated process. That's the part people miss in property disputes. It's rarely the loudest person who wins. It's the most documented one. The person who keeps records, understands easements, knows the difference between ownership and access.
She tried to landlock me.
Instead, she learned something expensive. You can build fences. You can pour gravel. You can send HOA emails. But you can't override recorded law with confidence alone. And when you try, you might end up negotiating for the right to reach your own front door.